one of my roles as the agent in charge of the FBI in the state of Michigan is I'm kind of the voice in the face of the FBI, and I travel around. I do hundreds and hundreds of speeches over the last 3 years throughout the state. This one's unique. I've never had so many microphones, things taped to my face. It's kind of like the Britney Spears look. A couple of my guys are here. I'm sure this will be all over the Detroit division tomorrow, right? No pictures. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to come out to Grand Rapids and to spend some time with you and talk about this topic. In my 22 years in the FBI, and you've seen my resume, and one thing I always like to correct, I was born in Dearborn because I actually lived in Southwest Detroit. There were no hospitals, as kind of it is today in that area. And so they took me over to Dearborn. I was born, went right back to Southwest Detroit. But this is my home. The state of Michigan is my home. I was born here. I was raised here. I went to college at Central Michigan. I went to law school at UAD. And then 22 years ago in May, I joined the FBI and left. And I've been all over the country. And it's been a great opportunity for me. I've seen the country, and I've worked so many different violations, so many different types of jobs with the FBI. I like to say it's almost like I've had 10 or 15 careers over the last 22 years. It's never ceased to be exciting for me and never ceased to be a challenge. And I always say I'm one of those lucky people in the world who loves their job. I really and truly enjoy my job. It's not a job to me. It's more of my life, more of a career to me. And I don't take that for granted. I thank God every day that I've had this opportunity to do something that I really, really do enjoy. In my time in the FBI, I've seen great change, though. Obviously, the world we live in has changed over the last 22 years or so. Travel, our methods of travel, how quick we travel, our communications, cyber, the internet, our use of computers. You know, I remember 22 years ago when I joined the FBI, and they brought the first computer into the FBI, and they put it in the squad area. And my supervisor at the time, these guys were all Hoover era folks. They've been hired by J. Edgar Hoover. And you know, everything was with a pencil and a 3x5 card. And these two young guys, when they were playing around with the computer, and the boss basically gave them every crappy case and lead that came in for the next 2 weeks. And I explained to them, if I ever catch you on that computer again, I'm going to have you fired. So we have come so far. Today I came back from my trip to Washington last week and got my my brand new computer. The screen is so damn big, it's blinding me. It's so quick, it's so fast. But we rely on it. We rely on it so much in everything we do. When our BlackBerries go down, we're lost. When our email accounts, we're not able to access them, we're lost. So it just shows you how far we have come. The threat that we face every day has changed greatly. When I came in the FBI, it was bank robberies, stolen motor vehicle rings, organized crime, the mob, the mafia, La Cosa Nostra. Those were the main focus of what we did. There was no, I mean, at that time, international terrorism, well, that was the Munich Olympic Games. That was something that happened in the Middle East. It didn't happen here. It would never happen here. It's hard today to really think about a world, to think about a time when that doesn't play on our mind. It's hard for us to think back to September 10th, 2001 and what the world was like at that time. But the FBI has changed. This is not the organization that I joined 22 years ago. The makeup, the diversity of the organization has changed greatly. I think we represent our society much better today in the people we've hired. I think people are much, when I came on, most of us were attorneys, accountants. We have diversified in the people we're hiring. People in hard sciences, computer backgrounds, language specialists. We're a much more flexible organization to face the issues that we face. When I joined, we had 156 violations of federal law that we had primary jurisdiction on. Today, it's well over 500. Unfortunately, we don't have, the number of agents has not increased in proportion to the number of violations that we've been asked to take a look at. When I was asked to do this presentation, though, the topic is so broad. And really what I wanted to talk about today was kind of narrow in on a few topics that I think are the future of crime? What are the greatest threats we're going to see over the next few years to the national security of the United States? As I said, the FBI has changed greatly from basically primarily a criminal investigative organization, a federal law enforcement agency, to what the director of the FBI calls us a national security agency. Anything that affects the economy, our ability to live violence-free, from a terrorist attack, from a cyber attack, affects the national security of this country. And really, that's kind of what the organization has morphed into. So I wanted to focus on tonight is a few areas that I think are going to be kind of hot topics over the next few years. I usually do my presentations myself. I've been so busy, obviously, since Christmas Day. I actually had my staff put together a presentation. And I was in Washington last week. Director Mueller had us, all the agents in charge, back for a quarterly conference, and so they emailed me the PowerPoint, and it was outstanding, but it was about 57 slides, and it would take me about 3 hours to do it. And I sat through 2.5 days of PowerPoint presentations, and I said, no, I can't do that to these people. So I've cut this down to about 19 slides and kind of did what I usually do. I went back through and picked out what I think would be interesting to a group like this. So hopefully this won't bore you or put you to sleep. But the first, this is briefly what I want to talk about, is these areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about transnational criminal enterprise, basically organized crime, and what threats we're seeing to the United States. A little bit about transnational gangs. We think about street gangs, we think about Bloods and Crips and gangs like that, but there is a whole new breed out there, internationally based, international contacts. They transcend our borders, and they are a real great threat to the national security of this country. So I'll talk real briefly about some gangs, talk a little bit about human trafficking, basically what I call modern-day slavery, and then talk about cybercrime, which what you're going to see throughout all of these topics, cyber basically transcends everything. It is the common thread. It is the future. It is the future of criminal activity. It is the future of threats to this country. So you're going to see that kind of weave its way through all of these things. But I'll talk specifically about some of those areas at the end. And one thing, I was asked when I was putting this presentation together, I was asked not to talk about counterterrorism because, I mean, it's kind of been beat to death. But I guess what we've seen over the last few months, and especially what happened in Detroit on Christmas Day, I would be remiss if I didn't quickly mention counterterrorism and really kind of what the threat is out there. Obviously, September 11, 2001, the threat was Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda based in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden and Abu Zawahiri running their camps. People from all over the world had come to those camps, had trained, had been indoctrinated with this radical Sunni extremist view of the Muslim faith. Had received military training, had received financial backing, and they had gone out back to their homelands to do whatever. Some had fought the Northern Alliance, some had come to fight the Soviets back in the 80s. But it was a huge problem because when the US military went into Afghanistan in 2001, we shut those camps down. We did a great job. Within 6 months, 80% of Al-Qaeda's command and control structure was gone, was either in custody or gone. You can figure out what that means. It put a huge dent in their ability to attack us. But what we saw was these people that had gone back to their own countries and had started these Al-Qaeda franchises, if you will, carried on. They were so entrenched, they didn't need bin Laden's money anymore. They went and did their own thing. Bin Laden and his folks went up into the tribal regions of Pakistan, were able to reconstitute themselves. So now we had two problems. We had a reconstituted Al-Qaeda, and we now had these other franchise groups. Well, soon, folks, we had a third problem, the three-headed monster, and that's the lone wolves, the people who become radicalized on the internet. And that is today, that is the biggest problem we face. You don't have to go to a camp in the tribal regions of Pakistan to become radicalized, to learn military techniques, to learn hatred against the United States. You can go right onto the internet, and these people post their rants and their railings and against the United States. They indoctrinate you. They can teach you how to make a bomb. They can do everything they need to do from the safety of a cave in Afghanistan or Pakistan. They can reach right into this country, and that is the biggest problem we face today. You all saw the news over the weekend. This female in Philadelphia, they're calling her Jihad Jane. That's a perfect example. A lady who was radicalized on the internet and was basically out there doing her business. It's a huge, huge problem, and I wish I had an answer to it. But it's something we're going to be dealing with over the next few years. So like I said, I don't really want to go into counterterrorism. If anybody has any questions at the end, feel free to ask, but I would be remiss if I didn't give you a quick take on what I think that the future threat is going to be with respect to counterterrorism. Organized, talk quickly about organized crime. When we think about organized crime, we think of the Sopranos. I mean, that's probably the best example today. The old Godfather's movies. You know, these kind of romanticized organized crime in the United States. And when I started the FBI 22 years ago, I think there were 28 organized crime families around the country. We had a very strong one in Detroit, Chicago, Kansas City, and of course New York, the 5 families in New York, Boston, Philadelphia. The law enforcement community, I think, has done an outstanding job over the past 20 years or so in attacking organized crime, the traditional organized crime, the mafia. And you see there the traditionally, you know, illegal gambling, prostitution, loan sharking, extortions, labor racketeering. Those were the bread and butter of organized crime, and we've been able to really dismantle them throughout the country. The problem is really based in New York and in the East Coast. They've been obliterated throughout the United States. But what we have seen is they have kind of reconstituted themselves to become smarter, and they've changed their modus operandi. What they're focused on now is more securities fraud, stock manipulation, and controlling the ports of entry in the United States. That's where they're making their money. The other thing we've seen is they've reconnected with Italian organized crime back in Italy. The 'Ndrangheta, the Sicilian Mafia, some of the traditional groups from where these guys came, you know, 120 years ago. So they're learning. They're learning. They're not dead. They're on life support, but they're still a huge, huge problem. And the issue with them is they're now reaching back across the border, making it much more difficult for us to attack these guys. As I said, we've been very fortunate, I think, and very good and very lucky in attacking these guys. But there's a void there. And when there's a void, there's always somebody willing, waiting to step in. And what we're seeing now are different groups from around the world basically stepping up to fill that void. I'll talk briefly about what we call Balkan organized crime. And I'm going to kind of expand that a little bit to kind of what we call Balkan Eurasian. And these are groups that emanated from the old Soviet bloc countries. You can see on the map here, you're talking about Romania and Bulgaria. Particularly an issue for us in the state of Michigan is Albania, being a big source of these folks. We've seen an increase as it actually as the success with our attack on traditional organized crime began to bear fruit was just about the time these folks started immigrating into the United States. They came here as the old Soviet Union fell, the Soviet bloc countries were in turmoil, civil war in the Balkan region. These people started coming to the United States. And they're rooted in their villages and in their families and in their clans. Very, very tight-knit organizations, very close. Kind of like the Italians were when they first came here, like some of the Asian groups when they first came here. They deal with their own. They're hard to penetrate. Some of these groups also had ties to organized crime groups back in from where they came. Especially the groups along the old Soviet border, Russian border, Romania, Bulgaria. Some of those have very, very strong roots back to organized crime back there. And they're heavily involved in arms trafficking. The biggest fear, one of the biggest fears we have are those groups getting their hands on old Soviet, Russian military weaponry, which they have, which they do, and they sell them around the world. And our biggest fear is they sell those to terrorists, which they have. There is always a concern about these guys getting their hands on nuclear weapons and proliferating those onto terrorists. That's a huge issue. To date, we don't think they have. They have actually, from time to time, scammed the terrorists. There's been reports of them selling nuclear suitcase devices to terrorists, and what they end up being are X-ray machines, mobile X-ray machines. So they've actually scammed Al-Qaeda on a couple of occasions. But you know, it is a huge concern for us. As I said, they started in the United States, low-level, street-level violence, extortion, things of that nature, home invasions. But they have moved on to more complex criminal activity. They are heavily involved in identity theft at this point. And as I said, they have moved into a void that was left by La Cosa Nostra. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in New York, we actually had reports of Albanian organized crime groups going into the old social clubs that the Gambino crime family ran and physically throwing the Gambino guys out the front door and taking over their locations, taking over their neighborhoods, taking over their rackets. You know, 20 years ago that would never happen, but they are in such a weakened state right now that they're not able to fight back. And the key to everything these folks do is violence. They're extremely, extremely violent groups. As I said, in the state of Michigan, predominantly the issue for us is in the Detroit metropolitan area. We have a task force that we put together with state and local officers to focus on these Albanian groups. But I can't stress enough the violence that these folks pose to the community. Quickly, another group are what we call Middle Eastern criminal enterprises. And when you see that, when we see Middle Eastern criminal enterprises, the first thing we think about is, are these groups involved in terrorist financing? Now, most times there is no nexus to terrorism. These are just plain old crooks. They're looking to make money. They're very American. They want money. They don't care about Hezbollah. They don't care about Hamas, Al-Qaeda. But we do, from time to time, run into organizations that are involved in terrorist financing. These are some of the violations that these folks are involved in: money laundering, sale of stolen, counterfeit, pirated merchandise. We've had cases where these guys were actually selling fake Viagra. That's enough said on that. But they are involved in the knockoff Coach bags, the knockoff Rolexes, the pirated movies. About 3.5 years ago, we had a case in New York targeting a group, a Middle Eastern criminal enterprise group, that was involved in these pirated movies. And you know, it started out very rudimentary. They would go into the theaters and they would, you ever see the Seinfeld episode where they're taping with the video? And it started out kind of like that, and then they got a little bit more sophisticated. It got to the point where they were just paying off projectionists to actually just dupe the tape. They were actually getting the movies the day of the premiere. And you could go out in New York, if you go down Canal Street in Chinatown, and you see these people running around with blankets over their back. They'll throw the blanket down in a street corner, and there'll be just hundreds and hundreds of pirated DVDs. And you can walk up, you can buy one for $5 and go home and watch Superman the day it came out without going to the movie theater. And we actually took this group down. It actually reached back into Lebanon and into Pakistan. And we estimated that that group was involved in or basically resulted in 80% of the pirated movies throughout the world. And it was interesting when we took that case down. I was in New York at the time, and I spent a lot of time walking around. I love walking around New York City. You couldn't find one of those guys for about 2.5 months. You could not find one of the video guys. And that, we put a huge dent in that operation. But these are some of the criminal activity these guys are involved in. Cigarette tax violations and tax evasion is a huge problem over in the Detroit area, the Dearborn area. Obviously, immigration fraud, identity theft. We're also seeing an increase of their involvement in things like healthcare fraud and mortgage fraud. And we have actually seen a lot of this money going back to Middle Eastern countries. One area that I find interesting is the unlicensed money remitters. And this is basically a century-old system of transferring money. It's kind of like their version of Western Union, wiring money. Take the money into a party store in Dearborn, and it shows up in Lebanon, and there's a small tax on it. Problem is, you know, it's not regulated by the U.S. government, it's not regulated by the Internal Revenue Service, and the money's flowing back and forth, and there's really no, there's no way to find out where that money's coming from. What is the source of that money? And many times it is criminal activity. So I know the FBI, IRS, and ICE are heavily involved in trying to tackle these unlicensed money remitters. But as I said, these are closed society folks, and it's very, very difficult to get inside those. African criminal enterprise groups, and really what I want to focus on here are the Nigerian groups. 20 years ago, you used to get a letter in the mail, and it was from General Ndungu of the Nigerian army, and he had $2 million at the time. This is before inflation hit. $2 million in U.S. funds, and he wanted to get it out of the country, and if you would help him, he would give you 5% or 10%. And it was interesting and unbelievable how many people actually fell for that scam. But these are actual organized crime groups in Nigeria that are perpetrating. Now today, you get an email. Today you get an email from General Ndungu, and he has the same, but it's the same scam, you know. And it's, you know, you send me your banking information, or it's an advanced fee scheme where, you know, you send him a percentage, and then he'll send you the rest back. I saw one last week that was interesting. A lady in the suburbs of Detroit, she had got an email. She forwarded it to the FBI because she said, this doesn't seem right. And this was, they're not using General Ndungu anymore. Now it's Sergeant Sherry Smith of the United States Army, who's in Iraq. And she has gotten a hold of $6 million worth of Saddam Hussein's gold, and she wants to send that to the United States. Now, she knows it's wrong, but she's a poor U.S. soldier, and she wants to make some money, and she wants to share it with you. So if you will send her personal information and work with her. And attached to this email was a U.S. passport of this Sherry Smith, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed American soldier, a perfect replica of a U.S. passport. But they're becoming much, much more sophisticated. And it is a huge problem. Billions and billions of dollars of losses into these groups in Nigeria. So you can read quickly on the African criminal enterprise, but the thing I really want to focus on was the Nigerian scams. They're still out there and becoming much, much more sophisticated. We think of street gangs, you know, what was that movie, Colors, about the LA street gangs. We think of the Bloods and the Crips. And in Detroit, you know, we have a lot of street gang activity, very, very violent. But what I want to focus on are more of the transnational gangs. These are groups that are international in nature. They've come to this country, immigrated, and they're here and they're involved in violent acts. The other issue is the outlaw motorcycle gangs. They transcend borders. Groups like the Hells Angels involved in a myriad of criminal activity. They could be here, they could be in Holland, they could be in Denmark, they could be in Canada, but they have allegiance to each other. Their organization transcends the borders of the United States. They don't care. Their criminal activity transcends the borders of the United States. Here's just a few numbers. These are overall gang numbers. 20,000 gangs, 1 million total members coast to coast. throughout the United States. And the interesting thing is, you know, they're not just inner city. It's just not an urban problem. These people have now enlisted in the U.S. military. Obviously, they're in our prison systems because we put them there. Some of the most violent gangs we have are in our prison systems right now, particularly in Texas and California. They recruit just like the terrorists do. They post on YouTube. They're on Facebook. They're great social networkers. The number of women involved in these gangs has just skyrocketed over the last few years. I mentioned motorcycle gangs. They really have no borders. But the groups I really want to focus on are what we call the transnational gangs. Gangs like 18th Street in Los Angeles, Sureños in Detroit, and in particular a group, MS-13, from Amado Salvatrucha from El Salvador. And I have a certain affinity for these guys because I opened the first case against the MS-13 in 1993 in Los Angeles. And it was funny, at the time, nobody, you know, I said this is the next organized crime. And people at FBI headquarters thought I was crazy. And I remember a guy telling me, you're making a whole lot out of nothing, Andy. These are just street-level thugs, and you're making these guys out to be the next Gambino crime family. And it's funny, if you talk to headquarters now, they tell you, boy, this is the biggest threat we have, gang-wise, in the United States. These guys are interesting because back in the 80s when El Salvador was undergoing the Civil War, you had a military, a National Guard that was trained by the United States. Basically, our special forces went down there and trained their National Guard to fight the communist insurgents. The insurgents were trained by the Soviets and the Cubans. As the Civil War raged on and started to come to an end, many of those people immigrated to the United States. And they immigrated to two places, Washington, D.C., and primarily Los Angeles. And when they got here, they lived in the community, the Civil War became a distant memory. And they banded together, and they formed this street gang. Now, what you had was a bunch of gangbangers running around the streets of Los Angeles who knew how to make bombs, who knew how to field strip a weapon blindfolded, who had killed people, who knew how to make booby traps. Extremely violent individuals. And they quickly took over large areas of Los Angeles. I remember interviewing a guy one time in the San Fernando Valley. For those of you who know, Los Angeles, that's quite a ways away from the ocean. And he was a member of a group called the Shoreline Crips. And I said to him, well, you know, why the hell are the Shoreline Crips up here in the middle of the valley? And he said, basically, MS-13 came in and took over our territory. We kept the name, but we lost the territory. And I can remember being in Rampart at, you know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and having 10 or 15 of these guys up against the wall, fixing them for weapons, and their buddies would be up on the rooftops. There were these 6-story tenements, and they would take shotgun shells, double-aught buck shotgun shells, and they would tape a BB to the primer and a streamer on the top, and they would throw these things over the top of the apartment building. 1 out of every 10 maybe went off, but that was enough. They would hit and it'd explode, and you would have basically shrapnel going out in all directions. It would hit their own guys, but they didn't care because it would hit the FBI and the LAPD guys. And I, to this day, still have a pair of pants that I keep at home where I have holes in the legs where some of the BBs went through. I kept that as kind of a memento and kind of something to always ponder back on how lucky I was. But you can see how violent these individuals are. Well, they're not just in Los Angeles anymore. They've spread throughout the United States. We have them in over 50 different locations. And a lot of it was as migrant workers spread through different areas of the United States. These folks went along with them. And they have become a huge, huge problem. Long Island, New York. Fortunately, we still have not seen they travel to Michigan, but maybe it's the weather or something. They don't stay. Maybe the weather. And I've always been very, very concerned about the west side of the state of Michigan being infiltrated by these as migrant workers come in. But to knock on wood, to this point, we have not seen them stay And so maybe our harsh winters are good for something. As I said, all of these gangs, MS-13, Sereños, they're increasingly involved in cross-border criminal activities. A gang like MS-13, and why they're such a concern to us is their reach back into El Salvador, Central America, and up through Mexico. They're very astute at trafficking. Trafficking weapons, trafficking drugs, and trafficking people into the United States. And they are used by some of the drug cartels to move things in and out of the United States. Very, very astute at doing this. Quickly, we'll talk about human trafficking. And as I said, I call human trafficking basically modern-day slavery. It's a very despicable act. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. You can see some of the numbers here, people that are being trafficked throughout the world. I think those numbers are a little bit low for the United States. I think the trafficking is a much greater problem. But what we're concerned about are people bringing women and children in particular into the United States, basically as indentured servants. They want to come here for whatever reason. Their family's here. Things are really bad in their home country, but they want to come to the United States. And they are basically come here as indentured servants. They're brought here and they have to work off a debt. And many times that debt is to work in the sex slave industry. It's bad enough when it's women, but what we're seeing more and more are what I call kids. We're talking about minors. And I think that's why it's such a concern to the FBI and ICE and Customs and Border Protection and all the agencies that are tasked with attacking this problem. It is a huge problem. And it's, you know, our borders are, I don't want to say, well, they're porous. And it's very difficult to stop this. But out of all of the different angles of human trafficking, I think the thing that really concerns me the most are the kids. Trafficking these kids for the sex trade industry. As I said, I think the key to everything we are going to be doing over the next few years is going to be the cyber realm. It permeates every other criminal activity. Counterterrorism, as I said, you've got terrorist organizations using the internet to recruit, to radicalize, and to bring people into the fight. You've got foreign governments out there trying to steal our state secrets, but not only our state secrets, but our business secrets. There's some foreign governments out there, I used to say the old Soviet Union, where they were like surgeons, strategic in what they went after. There are some, and I'm not allowed to politically state publicly, but there are some countries out there right now that they're like fishermen. They throw the net out and they're just grabbing anything and everything they can. They're hacking into our banking system to steal customer information. They're attacking Department of Defense contractors and DOD sites. They're stealing everything that they can. And then we also have the flat-out, old-fashioned criminals. They're involved in internet theft, trying to steal your identity, trying to scam you, trying to scheme you, any way they can use the internet to make money. As I said, I think it is the key to everything we do. And why is that? Because it's profitable and it's low violence. One of the trends we're seeing are people who were involved in criminal activity like drugs and arms sales, things like that. They're not doing that anymore. Because you can make more money on a computer, and it's a hell of a lot less violent. I think that's a telling sign right there, is what I was just saying. Cybercrime overtook narcotics trade in 2006 in profitability. You see a huge shift in the business. And people are going to go where the money is. It's now a $105 billion business. That was as of 2009. They're also very organized, very business. This is a business, folks. This is purely a business to these folks. And as I said, it's being used by terrorists, spies, sexual predators, you name it. I was talking earlier about human trafficking and the effect it has on our children. Certainly, child pornography, international trade in child pornography, videos and images of young children, it's a disgusting thing, but it's out there and it's huge, huge business. I had two phone calls on the way over here today, well, three. One was to advise me of a Ponzi scheme case that we were opening, and the other two were this, child pornography. And the agents were going out to arrest this afternoon, I can't say where because I'm not sure they've done it yet, but a bus driver from a school district in Detroit area. So you can see what a huge problem it is for the safety of our kids. When I was in New York, I was a special agent in charge of the criminal division of New York, and the squad that worked this stuff, the cyber or the child pornography, the kiddie porn, they sat right outside my office, and it was 8 or 9 highly motivated agents. How they work this stuff, I don't know. They do undercover online. They portray themselves as children. They get these people from all over the world who want to trade in this disgusting smut with them. And how they work this stuff, I don't know. Very courageous people. But 3 or 4 times a week, they would bring some guy from the Port Authority bus terminal who was going there to meet 14-year-old little blonde girl, Susie, and they found out that it was actually Special Agent Andre Jones, who was 6'5", 245-pound African-American special agent of the FBI. And they would bring him in, and we would, basically march him down the hall. They would act like, they did nothing wrong, and it was all just a mistake. And we would try to throw the book at these folks. I've got young kids at home, and many of you do too. I find nothing more appalling than people that deal in this kind of stuff. And the other thing we did was we would seize and forfeit their car, because they always drove and these were stockbrokers from Wall Street. These were dentists, PhDs. So we would seize their Mercedes and their Porsches, and that's really seemed to hurt them. That really seemed to hurt them as a forfeiture. But that really disgusts me more than probably anything that we do. One last thing I want to talk about before I go on to what we're doing is what we call phishing schemes. And we were talking earlier about the Nigerians, these Nigerian scams, when they, you get the email basically trying to get personal information. That's what a phishing scam is. And we're seeing a huge upswing in that. People trying to basically get your banking information, your personal information by sending you an email. There's one going around right now. It's the FBI. The FBI emails you, and we need certain information from you. That's a scam. The one you're probably going to see probably in about a week or so is the Internal Revenue Service as we get into tax time. Usually late March, early April, you start getting these emails from the IRS. And they need tax information, they need personal information. You'll get one from your bank. I mean, if you get one of these things, folks, call your bank. I mean, obviously, your bank has your information. They're not going to email you and ask you for your banking information. They have it. But it's a continuing, like I said, growing problem. And it affects us, because as I said, there's one going around right now where it's supposedly the FBI. So what are we doing to combat all these problems? And that's just a snapshot. That's a snapshot, folks, of what the international crime problem. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours. I promise you I wouldn't, because I want to get to the important part where you ask me questions. But that's a snapshot of really what we see as the future. What is the threat coming down the pipe to the FBI? So what do we do about this? I think the first thing is the intelligence capabilities that we have is so much better than it was when I joined the FBI. Especially since September 11, 2001, we have built up our intelligence gathering capabilities We have, every field office has what we call a field intelligence group. It's trained intelligence analysts who basically look at every dot that we get to connect those dots. You know, the complaint against the FBI after September 11th was, hey, you guys are great at getting information, but you don't know what the hell you're doing with it. And that was somewhat true. That was somewhat true. We've always been great information collectors. I think what we do now is a much better job of connecting those dots, of looking at the intelligence and making sense out of it, making heads or tails out of it. But the other thing is, what do you do with that intelligence? Do you action it? I think we're better at actioning it. But just as important is sharing it. Sharing it with our state and local partners. And in these cases, sharing it with our international partners. It's probably not a week that goes by that I'm not on the phone with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, CSIS, their intelligence service, MI5 out of London, New Scotland Yard. Obviously the world is smaller, the crime problem permeates everywhere. The key is sharing that intelligence and working together. And I think we do a much, much better job than we did several years ago at that. The other thing is the laws, using our laws. We've had the RICO, Racketeering and Influence of Corrupt Organizations Act, around for many, many years. We use that primarily for organized crime families. There's a great tool, basically dismantled organized crime, traditional organized crime in the United States. But now we're using it on public corruption. We're using it against these human trafficking organizations. We're using it against these organizations that are trafficking in child pornography. I'm not talking about one or two people. I'm talking about large groups that are profiting from this filth and smut that they traffic all over the world. So we're using our criminal laws in a much more cohesive manner today. As I said, cooperation, lots of it with both domestic and global partners. Some of the examples, I mentioned the Monticello Trucha MS-13 street gang. We started a national MS-13 task force in Washington. And I actually should say an international task force, because we have members of the El Salvadoran National Police on that task force, and has traveled back and forth between the two countries to combat this problem. Project Pantheon and the Italian-American Working Group, which has been around for several years now, focusing on the connection between La Cosa Nostra and the Italian organized crime groups back in Italy and Sicily. It's been a great success. Probably more success for the Italians. We've actually helped them infiltrate more on their side of the ocean than what we've gotten here. But that's a good example of an international working group. Nigerian Crime Initiative. These initiatives are only as good as your international partners, unfortunately. And you know, when you're working with the Brits, when you're working with the Canadians, when you're working with the Italians, that's one thing. When you're working with some of these countries that maybe are not sophisticated as we are in law enforcement, or maybe they're corrupt, I don't know, it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult to attack these problems, but we try. That's just a couple of examples of some of the initiatives. In conclusion, I thought this was an interesting statement, and I just got this the other day. The director was addressing us, and he said, we're developing and putting into place a different structure for the FBI that reflects the particular threat today. And my belief is that we look into 2010 and we look further in the future, increasingly the FBI's mission will be to address transnational threats, because we, the FBI, are the intersection between the threat overseas and our state and local law enforcement partners. Now, I thought that was a profound statement, not just because he's my boss and I want to stay as the head of the FBI in the state of Michigan, but I really think it cut to the chase, and it really does show what the problem we're going to face is going to be. And the other thing the director hammered home to us was the cyber threat. And he said, you know, he's been the director now 8.5 years. And I'm getting kind of near end of my career, and as I said, I've seen such great change in the FBI over the last 22 years. But he made a point. He said, you know, the change that we have seen over the last few years is nothing compared to what we're going to see over the next 8 years. And the key to it all is going to be the cyber threat. As I said, it permeates everything we do. And as he said, probably in 8 to 10 years, the FBI is going to be primarily a cyber threat organization. That's going to be taking up most of our manpower and our resources, and that's going to be the greatest threat that we face. Now, I said I'd do that quickly, and I wanted to get to your quick. To me, the best part is the questions, to interact and hear your questions and comments. And the questions don't have to be just on what I talked about. It can be on anything. And those of you who know me, I'm a pretty honest guy, sometimes a little too honest for my own good. But there are certain things I can't talk about, and if I can't, I'll apologize and tell you why. But I want to open up to questions, comments.
We have, Yep, we have 2 mics going around here, right here.
2 questions.
Yes.
One having to do with phishing,
Yeah.
and the other having to do with terrorism. Yeah. First one with phishing. I know your director pretty much got hit with the phishing scam himself. Fortunately, his wife was there.
Yes.
But
he loves to tell that story too.
Yeah, it was a good one. But in order to help the rest of us, a lot of emails come through with a wildcard address that the ISPs could stop from it because it's not a legitimate address. Why is there nothing going towards the ISPs to stop the wildcard addressing on emails, which would cut down on a lot of the phishing? And the second one having to do with terrorism. It seems like the last 2, the shoe bomber and the underwear bomber, came in from overseas. They had nothing to do with the security within our borders. Every time somebody breaks through from another country, we end up paying the price with freedoms or the body scanners that are coming through. You guys did a great job because they're not coming from here. Why are we paying the price when they come from somewhere else and another country doesn't do their job?
Well, quickly, the first thing about the phishing, and when you start getting into the public realm and you're talking about communications and computer companies and ISPs, I mean, that's more of a regulatory. I agree with you. I mean, there's probably an easier way to stop some of this stuff, and I think a lot of that's through the legislative mechanisms. You know what I'm saying? The other thing is, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I can, you know, and I quickly tell you, I mean, Christmas Day, my brother and his family were down from Traverse City. My father, my 90-year-old father, was in. It was a great family Christmas, you know, and the kids had opened their presents, and I'm a little bit of a clean freak, so I was cleaning up the paper in the boxes from the kids opening their presents, and it was in the garage, and I got a text message saying there was an incident in an inbound flight, and conflicting stories. Was it a firecracker? Somebody said it was a firecracker. Somebody said it was a potential bomb. You know, something about being in this organization 22 years and seeing what I see, and I just had a gut feeling. I grabbed my credentials, my gun, and jumped in the car. I didn't say anything. My wife said to me, you know, a couple days later, she said, "I've been with you so long enough. I know when it's the real thing," and I could tell this was probably the real thing. And then just all hell broke loose. You know, you get to the airport and so we were so focused on, and somebody asked me the question earlier about, you know, the Miranda issues, and you know, I will say this: I made the decision on my own, and I take full responsibility, not to Mirandize the subject initially. My training, my experience, I was of the opinion that we had exigent circumstances. That I needed to know, were there more bombs coming? Because, you know, you got to understand, we were standing there, we're getting the radios going off saying, you know, there were two or three more flights inbound to Detroit Metro with disturbances. So my experience in counterterrorism, I was sure, you know, Al-Qaeda doesn't send a single bomber attack. I mean, Richard Reed, they did, but I mean, mostly it's waves, and you know, I was convinced that we probably were going to have more. So, you know, I made that decision, and you know, was second guessed at the time a little bit. I guess in hindsight, you know, probably people think it was the right idea. I don't know, but when it's all said and done, and you have everybody second guessing you, I asked the same question. You know, the issue wasn't the security systems in the United States. The issue was the security in the countries that he traveled through. So the politicians, the powers that be, I mean, they started beating the hell out of the Department of Homeland Security and TSA. I asked the same question, you know, what did they do wrong? But I guess maybe I'm a little biased because I was standing out there that day, and you know, as the deputy director said to me a couple of days later, he said, "Boy, I'm sorry you guys' Christmas was ruined up there, Andy." And I said, "Well, sir, I'm glad my Christmas was ruined and not a lot of other people's." That's the way we looked at it. So. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, yes. I have a quick question. I know going back to the Balkan organized crime, I know Detroit has a growing Albanian population. Has there been recently any progress in infiltrating Albanian organized crime?
Yeah, we've had a couple of successful cases over the last 2 years where we've taken down small groups within that community. And I like to point out, I mean, it's like the mafia back in the early 1900s. I mean, they prey primarily on their own folks, their own immigrant community, the vast majority of which are hard-working, decent folks. You know, in the old country, the FBI, the police were, you know, maybe they were corrupt, whatever. I mean, you just didn't go to law enforcement. They don't trust us. They don't trust the Michigan State Police, whoever. So, you know, it is a difficult group to infiltrate. But yeah, it's a growing population, especially on the east side of Detroit, Macomb County area. It's a very quickly growing community, and along with that goes the crime problem. Yes.
Hi, thanks you for coming first, is what I like to say. With the Patriot Act and cybercrime, the FBI has a lot of latitude with investigating that. So does that make you more intrusive or more effective?
Somebody was asking earlier about you know, like the FISA techniques and different techniques that we've had or have gotten under the Patriot Act or have been expanded by the Patriot Act. And you know, it's almost like the traditional wiretap. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people are under the impression we can just go out and get a wiretap on, you know, and it's a very difficult thing. It's a very, very difficult. And most of the techniques that we use under the Patriot Act are just as difficult to get. You know, I'm not going to stand here and either defend or attack the Patriot Act. It is what it is. It has, I think the primary purpose that in a way it has helped us is it has knocked down the wall between the criminal side and the intelligence side. Prior to September 11, 2001, if you were working an intelligence case on a terrorist group, you could not share that with agents who were working criminal matters. And there was information that the CIA could not share with us, and we could not share with the CIA. It's, you know, it seems ludicrous now. It seems counterproductive, but that's the way it was. I think the Patriot Act has allowed us to break down some of those walls. I was in Dearborn. I was talking to a group a couple of weeks ago, and there was a group of librarians, and you know, the librarians get all upset about the Patriot Act, and they say, you know, basically it gives you the authority to come in and look at what people are reading. And I try to explain to them the whole purpose of that segment is that we don't care what you're reading, we don't care what books you're checking out. The issue with the libraries was that the terrorists, many of the 9/11 hijackers, were going into libraries and logging on to internet sites. They were using the computers, and they knew we couldn't go in there and get them. So that was the primary focus of that whole section was to give us the ability to go in there and monitor if these guys are in there using those computers, because they knew there was no way in hell we could go in there. So.
Yes. The terrorists, are they interested in bringing the United States to its knees, or are we still looked upon as a golden goose from them? And also, how I agree with you about the cyber crime. Are our like the FBI, the CIA, our military, can we assume that those computer capabilities are safe from, say, being shut down by the terrorists?
Okay, your first question is, I guess it's what terrorist organization you're talking about. If it's Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda has one goal, and that goal is to spread their radical warped version of the Muslim faith throughout the world. I mean, there's other splinter groups that are focused on, let's say, the Philippines or Malaysia or whatever they're from. But the overarching goal of Al-Qaeda is basically to have a caliphate throughout the world. And they're not going to stop until, I mean, they say it's because we have military bases in Saudi Arabia, they want to annihilate us, they want to kill us, and they don't care. Groups like Hezbollah, traditionally, the thought was that they would not attack the United States because, as you said, we're the golden goose. This is a great place for them to come and to raise money in predominantly Shia communities. And between that and the money they get from the Iranian government, why would you ever come and attack the United States and cut off that source of money? But I think the growing concern to us is, at what point, as relations between the United States and Iran continue to rapidly deteriorate, what is the line in the sand that's going to be crossed, that's going to trigger an attack on the United States? Because I always tell people, Al-Qaeda is like preschool compared to Hezbollah. They've been at it longer. Their trade routes are much, much greater. Their capabilities are much greater than Al-Qaeda. I mean, these guys are lobbing rockets into Israel. I mean, they're a very sophisticated organization. So that's a concern we have right now, is what is the line that we will cross that will cause Hezbollah to attack the United States. The other question was about cyber, right? The government computers. We have two within the FBI. We have two systems. We have an external system, which is, I got so many stuff on my belt here, but this our BlackBerry. So I have an external email system, and we have an internal closed system that theoretically should not be able to be hacked into. Actually, a foreign government, I won't say which one, actually did hack into our external system last year. But we just used that to basically to communicate, to say, yeah, I'll be in Grand, I'll be there, I'll be on time, I won't be late for the speech, to maybe email, stuff like unclassified stuff. But they have hacked into some of the DoD systems. They continually try to hack into our government systems.
Heather,
yes.
You were saying earlier how when you first joined the FBI, computers weren't looked at as relevant, but now they've become a part of our everyday use. And you're saying that you're focusing your FBI training now to dealing with the future wave of cybercrime, cyber terrorism, and everything else. Well, you've seen a few instances like with Al-Qaeda where they do go low-tech, they go under the radar to kind of reconstitute.
Yeah.
Assuming that we train for the next decade or 2 decades for cyber terrorism, cyber crime, how do you maintain the equilibrium to make sure you can police the low-tech cyber crimes and cyber terrorisms with the high-tech?
That is a problem. And I talk, I guess maybe I'm getting older, but we always talk about, those young kids coming in, they don't know what they're, they don't have the interpersonal skills that we had. They don't, they're great on the computer, but when they go out and interview somebody, boy, they don't have the skills. And I'm sure 22 years ago, the agents were saying the same thing about me, this young attorney coming in, what the hell does he know? So sometimes I think it's a generational thing, but there is some truth to that. You have to keep, I think, a well-balanced workforce, and I fear sometimes that we go too far one way or the other. Right now the focus is really on the cyber side of the house. It's on the intelligence analysts, military intelligence officers, and sometimes I'm concerned we're getting away from. Now, having said that, I have full faith that we will swing back, just because one good thing about the Bureau is we've always been able to adapt and be flexible. Yes?
Thanks for coming. I recently attended a treasury management conference for businesses, and one of the topics that was talked about was there's a lot of international people who will make replicate bank websites and large funds are transacted over international borders, and the financial institutions are basically saying, I'm sorry that money is gone. What has been your experience in dealing with these types of cyber crimes?
I think, and I know what you're talking about, I think the Treasury Department has basically taken the lead on that. We get involved if we'll see an organized group involved. And we have seen that type of activity primarily from some of the old Soviet bloc, Romania in particular. We've seen that type of activity emanating out of that region. I think we've developed over the last probably year to year and a half a pretty good working relationship with the Romanian authorities, and are starting to see some successes in those areas.
I was more interested in the human trafficking, and I was wondering if most of the victims from that come from like certain regions, or if they like Southeast Asia or more developed areas too.
Mostly underdeveloped areas. These are people who are trying to get away. Where are you? Get away with your hand. I'm sorry. It's blinded by the light. And so, different regions of China, some regions of Russia, the old Soviet bloc, but Southeast Asia, a lot out of Southeast Asia. And, it's people who are trying to escape a certain situation. I mean, still many, we still have the reputation of having the streets of laden with gold. So I think, it's an opportunity to come here. The unfortunate thing is, as I said, it's modern day slavery is what it is. And you're brought here, and you're basically an indentured servant for a certain period of time. And it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to ever work that debt off. You become so involved with these people, so indebted to them, you're never going to get out of it. Yes.
Hi, thanks a lot for coming. You said very diplomatically earlier that...
I'm getting better. I usually don't say things diplomatically, so...
that the law enforcement agencies in some of the countries that you partner with in order to take care of some of this, transnational crime are corrupt. My question is, how can you... And there are other indices that many of these countries are very corrupt, including their law enforcement agencies. What really do you do? How can you function and get information and use it from such sources?
Some of it it's certainly outside of our realm, but it's more diplomatic. It's more State Department or legislative. We're not going to give you certain funding. Those types of things. Where we get involved is trying to develop relationships, training. We do a lot of international training. We have a international training facility in Budapest, and then we have one, I forget where it is, somewhere in the Far East. And we send agents from all over the United States over to train these law enforcement officials in good, proper investigative technique. Now, the problem is we can't pay them. I mean, many countries, they're basically working at a poverty level. If you look at Mexico and some of the issues they have with law enforcement corruption down there, a lot of it is just they're underpaid, and their life's threatened, their families, like whatever. It's just easier to take the money. But there are, I'll be honest with you, there are some countries we're not going to get anything out of them. We know it. We just know it. I mean, I can't publicly say, but you can figure out some of those as you continue to get letters from Nigeria. Yes.
Thank you for coming. My first question is, how much of the opium that's produced in Afghanistan, what percentage of those farmers are actually contributing money towards anti-American interests? And what level of concern do you have about increased potency and multiple methods of consumption for American youth revolving heroin that's been brought in from Afghanistan?
It's difficult for me to answer that. I actually had a slide on it, and I took it out because I said I don't want to cut into DEA's area. But my friend, my counterpart at DEA, I mean, he keeps talking about heroin. It's a huge problem. DEA, we have a lot of FBI agents in Afghanistan and Iraq right now, and they're basically doing battlefield interrogations of insurgents, and we're helping train the Iraqi police, the Afghan forces. DEA has a large number there just on the drug war. I think the difficulty is, that's a source of money for a lot of these folks. and all of a sudden you're cutting off their source of income, and how are they going to live? If the government can't provide an alternate way to make money or give them funds or food or whatever, that's a bad situation. That's a disaster. That's a train wreck. And DEA recently actually lost some of their agents over there, and I believe a helicopter crash, but they're very, very involved. But that's the big concern right now is the heroin traffic, and a large percentage, I don't know the number, but a large percentage, it does come out of Afghanistan. Yes.
Hi, I'm right here. I want to ask a question about pirated goods or knockoff goods, because to some extent, the American value on capitalism thinks these are just people who are trying to make a buck, and it's good to undercut the price of, ridiculous price of a Coach bag or a Louis Vuitton bag by making a cheaper one, To some extent, that's just good enterprise. So to what extent are these knockoff items really tied to violent crime or anything dangerous? To what extent is this just somebody trying to make a buck, innocently?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple different issues. Number one is it basically a lot of those companies are U.S. companies, and they're getting undercut, and people are losing jobs in this country. But I'll tell you, that case I was talking about in New York with the pirated videos, they controlled 80% of them worldwide. Direct link back to Al-Qaeda. That portion of that money was going to finance terrorist activity. So when I'm talking about Middle Eastern groups involved in that, that's really what I'm more focused on, are the ones that are taking that money and giving it back to a terrorist organization. So that answer the question? Yeah.
Well, to what extent is that normal, and what is that, just a small segment of the market? These technically, these guys selling sunglasses, they're not tied to organized crime.
Yeah. Well, they usually are. They're getting those sunglasses. Any of you been to New York, Canal Street? You can buy anything and everything on Canal. My wife used to love going. I said, don't buy that stuff. Put it back. But she has 4 Coach bags, which have cost me an arm and a leg. But they're tied to something. They're tied to somebody. It's not just some guy. He's getting them from someplace, and it's usually an organized group. So it could be terrorist financing. It could be just an organized crime group out of China, or like a Tong, or it could be an organized crime group out of the old Soviet bloc countries. So I guarantee you that money is going to an organized crime, some type of an organized group. They're getting the money, and that stuff's being made in some sweatshop in Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, so are the Nike shoes, but.
I've got time for 2 more questions. Run right over here.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first one is, are the Albanians Christian or Muslim?
Okay.
And the second question is, the Mohawk who was killed in Dearborn a couple of months ago, was he tied to some crimes, a syndicate?
Okay, the first question on the Albanians. I believe Albania is primarily a Muslim country. I believe it's don't quote me on the numbers, but it's about 75%, I believe, Muslim, and I think the rest are Catholic or Orthodox Christians. The rest of the 35% or so. And then the other part was the
Mohawk who was killed in Dearborn a couple of months ago.
Oh, the Imam, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's talking about the shooting in Dearborn, October 28th. Very sensitive, obviously very sensitive, highly sensitive case in the Detroit area. And all I can say about this is, look, I take full responsibility for what happened that day. It was I authorized the plan. And I think that what you're going to see over the next, hopefully very quickly here, a couple of weeks or so, is more information coming out. I've asked people to basically wait till all the information comes out on a case, because there's a lot of inflammatory things being said. I was at a meeting the other day in Dearborn, and a gentleman got up and said, "You FBI, you assassinated this man, you shot him 22 times in the back." And I guess as I get older, I get a little smarter. I just kept my mouth shut. But the reality of it is, there's 11 men awaiting trial in federal court, and we cannot release the evidence because it's going to affect their right to a fair trial. The other thing is, there's 2 investigations going on one by the Department of Justice and one by the Dearborn Police Department, into the shooting. And so I can't really say anything until those things are released, which should be in the very near future. But I've asked everybody, just, you know, there's three kinds of people in the world. There's people who are going to believe me because I'm the FBI and they believe their government, what their government says blindly. There are people who are never going to believe me because I'm the FBI and they don't trust their government. The vast majority of us, I think, are in the middle and want to see the facts and make up our own mind. And that's what I ask everybody to do. Just, you see the facts. Bottom line is this: if we did something wrong, it's going to be my job. And but that's what they pay me for, is take responsibility. So, yes, there's more. Yes.
Hi. With the concentration of the F-13 incidents in the Washington, D.C. area, how well do you think the different agencies, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, are working together when needed and appropriate, and even in their relationship with state and local agencies there, especially in your capacity handling a Midwestern division?
You know, I got to tell you, the economy of this country sucks. The economy of the state of Michigan is even worse. We've lost 2,000 police officers in the state of Michigan in the last 4 years. When you start laying off Michigan state troopers, you know you're in bad shape. The only way that we survive as in the law enforcement community is to share information, to share intelligence, and to work together. And I think that the task forces that we have around the state, many of them that we run, some DEA runs, I think the one thing we figured out is there's enough crime to go around. There's enough publicity, if that's what you want, to go around. And bottom line is, we work for you, and we need to be out there protecting the citizens of the state of Michigan. So I've got a great relationship with the head of ATF, DEA, and the Detroit Police Department. Colonel Pete Munoz from the State Police is a friend of mine. We work together, and we owe it to the people of the state of Michigan. If we don't, then shame on us. Because the bad news is this, folks, I don't think it's going to get any better in the near future. I don't see the economy rebounding in the state of Michigan and us hiring those 2,000 police officers. They're gone. They went to Texas, and they joined police departments down there, and they're not coming back. My nephew's, how many of you are from Grand Valley? I was from Grand Valley. My nephew's a sophomore over there. And I told him it's a damn good time to be in college right now, because the job market, especially in this state, when we were talking earlier, we're losing an entire generation from this state, because there's nothing here to hold people here. So I guess my point is this: my job as the head of the FBI in the state of Michigan is to do my best to make this state someplace that businesses want to come to wipe out the corruption in the city of Detroit, so businesses want to come there, that they don't have to grease somebody's palm to get in. The people want to build in the city of Detroit and not have to worry about violent street gangs shooting out their windows and extorting them. That's my job, is to make this state a place that people want to come to and want to stay, and that business and it could thrive and the economy could thrive. And the last thing I'll say is this. I started off telling you how happy, I mean, I love my job, and and that's not bull. I mean, I really enjoy it. I love getting up in the morning and going to work, and I'm very blessed to be in that position. But even more special to me is to be the agent in charge of my home state. It means a little bit, I mean, my job means a great deal to me, but it means even more to me that I'm doing this in the state of Michigan, that I'm doing something for my hometown, my home state. So it's very, very special. I don't want to get all soapy on you, but it really is something that's very near and dear to me. I want to stay here. I got 2 more years till I can retire. I want my kids to grow up here. I want my kids to be Tigers and Red Wings fans like I am. My oldest daughter's getting recruited to play field hockey at Central Michigan, my alma mater. I want my family to stay in Michigan, but there's got to be something for you to stay here, right? So, yeah, thank you.